We have just witnessed one of the most profound and emotional moments in the history of the Catholic Church, the passing of Pope Francis. A dedicated leader who not only changed the way we lead, but also transformed how we understand faith, love, and humility. The story of his life and legacy is an inspiring journey, a reminder of the power of quiet decisions that hold deep meaning. Let us reflect together on the life of a pope who lived, served, and departed like a father in the family of faith. Pope Francis passed away just one day after unexpectedly appearing at the main balcony of St. Peter's Basilica to offer a blessing to those attending the Easter Mass. The funeral of the Pope, by tradition, is a grand and solemn event, but Pope Francis recently approved simpler funeral plans. He also abolished the tradition of placing the Pope's remains on a raised platform in St. Peter's Basilica for public visitation. Instead, visitors will be invited to pay their respects while the Pope's body remains in an open coffin. Pope Francis will also be the first pope in over a century to be buried outside the Vatican. He will be laid to rest at a basilica in Rome. His remains will be displayed at St. Peter's Basilica, and the funeral rites will last for 9 days, with the public invited to pay their respects. Cardinals will decide on the exact time of the funeral. Afterward, the cardinals will gather at the Vatican to elect the Pope's successor. Pope Francis, the spiritual leader of over 1.2 billion Catholics worldwide, had faced ongoing health challenges over the years, with clear signs of frailty in his body. Born as Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Argentina, he had to have part of his lung removed at the age of 21 due to illness. That injury left marks not only on his body, but also throughout his life, with pneumonia and breathing difficulties quietly recurring whenever his health declined. Vatican often had to adjust or quietly alter his public schedule. In such moments, waves of worry and prayer rose across Catholic communities worldwide. A close associate once revealed that he quietly said, "I entrust myself to God's will." But beyond these physical trials, it was Pope Francis's bold decisions, where he would rest, how he would be remembered, and how he changed worship practices, that truly shaped the image of a pope, unafraid to step into the old traditions. This is a gentle yet profound farewell, with nearly 800 years of funeral traditions at the Vatican. A small act, but full of power, stemming from personal piety, not church regulations. In a church where every symbol carries a sacred message, his decision rings out like a whisper of humility. A pope choosing the loving arms of Our Lady instead of the royal tombs of previous predecessors. How will he be buried? A funeral that causes a stir due to its simplicity. For centuries, the funerals of popes included 3 layers of coffins, one of wood, one of lead, and then another wooden layer, symbolizing eternity and the sacred role of the successor of St. Peter. The coffin was often engraved with the papal seal and other solemn symbols. But Pope Francisco chose an entirely different approach. He wanted to be placed in a simple wooden coffin, lined with zinc inside, and that was it. This shocking decision was confirmed in the funeral rites recently issued by the Vatican in 2024. This was not just about material things, but a sermon in cedar wood, a quiet declaration of spiritual poverty, recalling the image of Saint Francis of Assisi, the saint after whom Pope Francis took his papal name. A man who abandoned everything to live in poverty and serve others. Imagine a global leader resting like a country priest. That image is enough to stir hearts and make millions of believers stop and reflect. Not only did he simplify the coffin, but Pope Francis also changed how the faithful would bid him farewell in a deeply emotional way. According to the updated funeral rites of 2002, His body will not lie on a gold-plated platform in St. Peter's Basilica as tradition dictates, but will lie in an open wooden coffin, placed in a close space where the faithful can approach, touch, pray, and weep, instead of just standing far away behind a ceremonial barrier. His death will not be confirmed in a chapel filled with mournful rituals, but in his own private room. There will be no elaborate ceremonies, just silence and the small light of faith. And that is the call. This is a funeral for the faithful. And indeed, this is the Pope who washed the feet of prisoners, embraced the sick, spoke with the homeless, and even in his final hours, wanted to be close, not as a king, but as a father in the family of faith. Pope Francis and the trimming of traditional Latin Mass rites between the two ranks. On 16th of July, 2021, Pope Francis issued the Traditionalist Custodes Decree, a decision that shocked many, severely limiting the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass, TLM, which was established by Pope Pius VI in 1570 and had echoed for nearly 400 years in churches using sacred Latin, with the priest facing the altar, a ritual full of mystery and sanctity. Everything began to change after the Second Vatican Council in 1970, when the Church officially introduced the Novus Ordo Mass, using the vernacular and encouraging greater participation from the faithful in worship. By 2007, Pope Benedict XVI issued the Summorum Pontificum Apostolic Letter, allowing the traditional Latin Mass to be restored and continue to spread. For many believers, this was a sacred gift, an ancient but radiant light for those who loved the deep beauty of traditional worship. However, for Pope Francis, everything looked very different. He saw that for some, the Latin Mass had strayed from its liturgical roots and had become a tool of division, even undermining the spirit of unity from the Second Vatican Council. A church needs a unified liturgy, he wrote, calling on bishops worldwide to limit the TLM and guide the faithful toward a single, unified liturgy. This was a decision that caused a deep divide within the church. For some, it was a painful loss, as if their sacred legacy had been taken away. For others, it was an old wound healed, ending the underground divisions that had smoldered for a long time. As a Jesuit, Pope Francis was not held back by nostalgia. He prioritized his apostolic mission over a longing for tradition. He did not erase the past, but pruned it to make it bear fruit. A bold trimming that stirred the church and social media, because the issue was not just about the Latin Mass. It was about the heartbeat of his papacy, pushing the church forward, not backward into old roots. The Catholic Church has deep roots, from the tomb of St. Peter, linked to the first apostles, to the Latin prayers resounding within the medieval cathedral arches. Pope Francis does not deny this, but he is redrawing the picture of faith with the thread of reality, service, and mercy. As the first Jesuit pope born in Argentina, a harsh land where the church does not always sit on a throne, but is among the poor, he carries the Jesuit spirit of action, service, and dedication to the margins of society and the soul. For over 10 years, he has shifted the focus of the church, welcoming refugees, condemning consumerism, and calling out greed. Now he revisits the liturgies. By choosing the Basilica of Our Lady as his final resting place, by selecting a simple wooden coffin, and by opening the doors for the faithful to come close to him as he departs, he does not deny tradition, but is reshaping it. In the light of today's gospel, Pope Francis is not merely changing rites, he is asking a bigger question for the whole church. What is more important, external forms or the inner heart? Historians call this a historical turning point, while Catholics feel it as a profound spiritual challenge. His papacy began in 2013 and may end not with the sound of tolling bells, but with a whisper strong enough to pierce through generations, a legacy that we, his children, will continue to reflect upon and struggle to understand. Every time his health declined, the world held its breath, as if the heart of the church, too, was sinking. From Manila to Milwaukee, silent prayers rose, rosaries tightened in hands. Hope was placed in a father growing weaker, but not defeated. But there is an ironic truth. Even the most devoted shepherd cannot avoid crossing the final threshold of human life, where the Lord opens his arms to welcome him home. The acts of self-sacrifice and change he made were not just true stories, but mirrors reflecting our own faith. A resting place outside the heart of the Vatican, a simple coffin that anyone could make, an ongoing liturgical debate with no end in sight. All are the footsteps of a man whose mark on the church he loved so deeply will never fade. They are not loud, but and to ask ourselves, what is tradition, if not love that bends down for others? And so, what Pope Francisco is living and choosing is not just a part of doctrine, but a call to every believer to reconsider the true nature of faith. It is not the throne, it is not the cloak, but humility, closeness, and love. And that journey begins not with a loud bell, but with a silent turning point, leaving behind the rituals of the palace. Stepping into the arms of the Mother in a world full of turmoil, leaving an indelible spiritual mark for today's church and the church of tomorrow. And then, like the grain of wheat sown in the ground, Pope Francis completed his earthly journey. His life was not as dazzling as fireworks in the night, but it burned quietly like a small flame, enough to warm the cold house of the church amidst a time of great change. He did not leave behind grand titles, palatial residences, or grandiose legacies. But what he left behind was the living gospel spirit, a faith that is close, humble, present alongside the poor, the forgotten, the insignificant. In his quiet departure, the whole church is called into a season of spiritual reflection, to remember that this Father did not live to lead, but to testify to love without borders, a love not afraid of being misunderstood, not seeking applause, only faithfulness. He lived and passed away like a beloved child of the church, a shepherd ready to carry the wounds of the church, not with power, but with boundless mercy. We do not weep for a dynasty ending. We bow our heads before a person who quietly built the kingdom of God with every small stone of sacrifice, courage, and compassion. May the soul of Pope Francis rest in the compassionate embrace of God, and may everything he sowed today, in the future, bloom into a holy harvest in the hearts of the faithful. Thank you for joining us as we explore the life of Pope Francis and his deeply meaningful decisions. If you found this story touching and would like to continue following more insightful videos and articles, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on our channel. Let's continue sharing and reflecting on the values of faith, love, and humility that Pope Francis has left behind. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.